the Magna Carta. And I'm going to go over some of the key points of the Magna Carta and its relevance to American democracy. So let's start off with a provision in the Magna Carta. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions, or exiled, or in any way destroyed, nor will the king proceed against any free man with force, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land. And how does this translate into American democracy? Well, in the Sixth Amendment, we are guaranteed a trial by jury. The lawful judgment of his peers turns into trial by jury. So the next piece that I'm going to take a look at is Magna Carta and Parliament. Now, Parliament was a new term in the 13th century England, and it became the buzzword for many types of meetings. These included talks between diplomats of different countries, business meetings of London craftsmen, and assemblies where the king and barons discussed government affairs. The term was so popular that a clerk writing in 1244 even referred to the confrontation between King John and the barons in 1215 as the Parliament of Runnymede. What happened at Runnymede was not, of course, a session of Parliament, an institution that did not yet exist. 13th century England was governed by the king. And so we have a couple of key points here that Magna Carta did. If you can see here, the first highlighted area, one is that the king is not an absolute monarch. The 13th century judge, Henry of Bracton, stated this principle clearly. The king himself ought to be subject to no man, but he ought to be subject to God and the law, since law makes the king. And how does this translate to American democracy? The American president is also held to the law. His, or someday her, power is limited by the Constitution. A second principle of Magna Carta is that the king may levy taxes only when the men paying those taxes agree to them. Simply put, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, quote, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes." And the third principle is that the king's subjects have a right to refuse to obey an unjust king. Article 2, Section 4 actually has a clause for that. The President and Vice President and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment. In other words, they could be removed from office if they fail to uphold the law. And the next piece, Magna Carta today, we have a couple of interesting points. First, dealing with religion. Religion. The first chapter of the Magna Carta, originally, it was not divided into chapters, granted that the English church shall be free. The final section restated that claim. Medieval Englishmen demanded free elections in the English church because they hated the king interfering in religious matters. Americans expanded Magna Carta's concept. They wanted to keep church and state totally separate. The third article of the Bill of Rights reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Taxation. We talked about taxation before. King John imposed heavy taxes on his barons, and they were basically fees that were needed for military service. And they were not allowed except common council of our realm. In other words, they had to be approved. More than 500 years later, King George is imposing crippling taxes on the American colonies. And this causes the cry, "No taxation without representation." And that comes out in the Constitution, again, in Article 1, Section 8, reading in part, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes," as I stated before. And so justice. We have religion, we have taxes, and now we have justice. The Magna Carta's most important claim for individual liberty is the clause, "No free man," as I stated earlier at the beginning of the tutorial, "no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions or exiled or in any way destroyed except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." Article 3, Section 2 of the United States Constitution reads, in part, "The trial of all crimes shall be by jury." The Bill of Rights includes, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Now, due process of law means appropriate actions of the established law of the land. Due process in the United States means, in part, the writ of habeas corpus, which literally means you have the body. This is the American's right to be brought before the judge, and the judge hears the case whether or not the government has enough evidence and the right to hold you. Public and speedy trial, that's important. No secret trials, and you cannot be held in prison without being in front of a judge or a jury. And you cannot, well, it says estify, but it's testify against yourself. That is banned by the United States Constitution. And of course, you have the right to a jury trial. These are the concepts of some of the concepts of due process in the United States. And that concludes the tutorial.